Good morning, folks. Welcome to Coffee with Artists. My name is Rachel Wilkins. I am the co-founder of Conception Arts and host of the Smart Art Business Podcast. Delighted to have you with us this morning for Coffee with Artists. We have a fabulous guest today, Ola Rondiak. Ola is a mixed media contemporary artist from the Ukraine. So, Ola, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So we met a couple of years ago. You showed at one of our Conception Arts events, and you actually took home the award for excellence in New York City, which was wonderful.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful honor. I have it prominently displayed in my studio.
That's awesome. Awesome. So you have a really interesting backstory. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot to cover today. Just to anybody out there who's just tuning in, if you would be interested in asking any questions to Ola about her experience, about her artwork, just pop them in the comments and we will either get to them during the session, or if there's a lot of questions, we're going to revisit them at the end of the session. So tell me about this beautiful work that you create. It's certainly mixed media, and I know you've been experimenting with sculpture as well. So for somebody out there who maybe has never seen your work before, how would you describe it?
Let's see. Yeah, as you said, it's mixed media. I've done a lot of, let's say, contemporary female portraits mostly on canvas. And I've been experimenting a lot with sculptures the last couple of years, kind of like a neo-pop sculptures that have been inspired by my children's clothing, which carries many symbolic messages with them as well. So yeah, I mean, mixed media, contemporary, mostly female portraiture, which has a lot of symbolism and metaphors within. A couple of the main metaphors that I work with are Ukrainian. I come from a Ukrainian background. My parents were immigrants from Ukraine, so I was first generation born in America, and so I incorporate. And also, my husband and I moved to Ukraine about 25 years ago and raised 3 children there. And Ukraine has gone through a lot of tumultuous times, including the times that we've been living there, a couple of revolutions and a war in the East. So I incorporate a lot of symbolism from my childhood and from things that have been happening historically in Ukraine. And I guess a couple of the main metaphors are this ancient Ukrainian headdress, which is called a vinok, which is worn on top of a woman's head. And in there, I put a lot of symbolism from things that have been happening in the revolutions and historically with Ukraine. And also, I've been making these sculptures called the motankas out of plaster of Paris. They were inspired by the ancient Ukrainian rag dolls. And they were traditionally given from mother to daughter as talisman for good health and fortune. So when the war broke out in Ukraine a few years ago with Russia, I started creating them out of plaster of Paris also to add the element of healing as well as fortune and nurturing.
Beautiful. So when did you actually
probably a long-winded answer for your question?
Well, I'm so excited to dig into this story because I know obviously I know a little of your backstory from meeting you, and then I've done a little reading, and you've just had a lot of success over the last 12 months or 2 years, it seems, as well, in terms of where you're getting recognition from. Tell us a little about the embassies, the cultural center in Paris. Tell us a little about how those things came about.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I do feel like it's been somewhat of an explosion. It's been really, really busy. So honestly, in a guilty way, I've enjoyed the slowdown with the quarantine. Unfortunately, under the circumstances. But yeah, I think, gosh, I don't know where to begin to answer that question. I guess it's just through keeping busy, and I guess my motto was probably not to say no to anything. So it made me very busy, but it made me meet a lot of people and make interesting connections. And one thing, I've learned that you never know what the purpose of an exhibit or a show is. It could be just one special person you meet as a friend. It could be for another show. It could be for a sale. And so I've learned to enter each show and exhibit with a completely open mind. And honestly, something comes from every effort. And it's just been wonderful, like all the connections and opportunities that have been developing.
I love that you said that because I think that, as artists, we can kind of quantify our success sometimes on what sells, what
Exactly.
monetary value an event had, when
Yeah.
often I relate to that so much because, for a long time I did the same. I was like, well, it wasn't successful unless I sold. And
Right.
when you think back to some of those occasions, like some of the best conversations happened, some of the, biggest connections that would lead to much bigger things came from
Right.
those times. Well, like you said, even just a deeper, meaningful connection with someone who will become a friend.
Exactly.
There's so
Exactly. It's as simple as that. It's that I've definitely learned that about my art, that it's almost not about me or my art. It's just art serves as such a huge connector in so many ways.
So on that note, what has been the most moving response that you've had? Have you had anybody who's, perhaps really relates on a deep level to what you're putting out there?
Yeah, especially with, I think what's been fascinating is that I grew up in America, but with such a strong connection to Ukraine because of my parents. I mean, when they immigrated under political reasons. So, they were forced to leave under the Stalin regime. And with that came a lot of trauma because my mother was separated from her mother from when she was like 11 years old, and she never saw her mother again. She ended up kind of moving west with my grandfather. They kept thinking that they would return, but the front of the war kept going further west. So they ended up being displaced people in Austria for about 4 years. And then they were sent to America. And then, so my mother never saw her mother again, or her sister, who died at 19. And so there's a lot of trauma in there that I think I've realized that was passed down to me, kind of this
Generational
trauma. Yeah. And it took me many years to realize that I was carrying that. And I think art has helped me understand that part about myself and how to transform that energy into something more positive instead of it carrying a heavy negative burden that you don't really know what to do with. So when you ask this question, I think specifically to some older women, especially in Ukraine, when I have museum shows there in Kiev, Ukraine, because under the Soviet Union, everything was held so quiet. You weren't allowed to talk about things, and the cultural identity and language of Ukrainians was very suffocated. So my artwork I think with all the symbolism and historical reference to Ukraine and to Ukrainian women, especially, I guess, with the freedom of the perspective that I come from America. So that whole combination, as I think, been very meaningful and shocking to a lot of the older generation in Ukraine, because it's new for them to see this in public space, to bring up the issues that I bring up, the issues about how the Soviet Union suffocated people's voices because they weren't allowed to talk about it. So when they see my artwork, they literally start to cry, and then they just come and thank me for putting it out there, basically for giving them a voice, for giving their mothers who are no longer here a voice. And that's how I mean, for me, I feel a lot of my inspiration comes from my grandmother that I never met. That was my mother's mother, who she didn't see from 11 years old. I mean, I remember being like 9 years old in Ohio when my mother got the phone call that her mother had died, and how sad she was. And then moving to Ukraine, I think, gave me the ability to soulfully, spiritually kind of connect with her and have her voice come through me and my art, because she was, after my mother and grandfather was sent to Austria as displaced people, my 19-year-old aunt, who was named Ola, that's why my mother named me Ola, she died in my grandmother's arms, basically, and then they sent my grandmother to a female labor camp in Russia for about 10 years. So then for a long time during this Cold War, my mother, didn't even have communication with her mom, but eventually they did through letters. And when I think about my grandmother's life, I mean, she was sent to this female labor camp, so she was physically doing hard labor all day. And at nighttime, she was secretly embroidering. She embroidered these like religious icons she used potato sacks for canvas, fish bones for needles, and threads just from her clothing or whatever, in hopes that it would somehow reach her family wherever they were. She didn't even know where they were yet. So when she got freed from there, she smuggled it into her clothing and then gave it to a priest who was traveling to the States. He smuggled it into the States, and they made a show out of it in Chicago in 1980. The Chicago Tribune wrote about it, From Soviet Union with Love, and they had all these images of her embroideries, which we got a few of them physically, because through the Ukrainian diaspora, some of these embroideries then were sent to my mother. So thinking about her life, like in this physically, labor camp, and at night she was secretly doing this after losing everything, her family, her home, and she still had this hope. So it's like anytime I think that I want to complain or I'm upset or I'm having a pity party, I just easily derive strength from her. It's so accessible. So I just think it's amazing that spirit of hope that people carry, and it's so strong.
It's amazing. What an amazing story. Wow.
Yeah.
I can really visualize it as well. I mean, to be able to want to focus on something creative and beautiful in such an oppressive, traumatic time.
I know. And I think like when we moved, I moved back to in and out of Ukraine a couple times. And so the last time I moved back was in 2013 with our 3 kids. And I just somehow was determined to make art like a full-time thing. I guess I was able to because the kids were older and they were, full-time in school. Mm-hmm. So that was 2013, and I said, okay, I'm devoting, as much time as possible, a daily routine, a daily work schedule to my art, whether I know what's coming or not. Mm-hmm. And that's the year I created like 50 female portraits within a couple months. And that was kind of the real beginning of my art, because a friend of mine came in the house and said, oh my God, like all these portraits, you have to exhibit them somewhere. I'm like, I know, it's kind of weird. There's too many women looking at me.
Wow.
So she offered to have it in her garden because she had a beautiful rose garden. So we set up 50 easels with the paintings, and almost all of them sold. So then I allowed myself to start buying canvases, and yeah, it was very exciting.
And that was in the Ukraine?
Yes, in Kiev, Ukraine.
So obviously we talked about how it was received, but how, to mention that they all sold 50 pieces of artwork, that's kind of unheard of, right?
Yeah, well, I kept a few for my kids.
Okay. Well, that's good. But how, so is there a sense of support of the arts in the Ukraine today, would you say?
Then there was, I guess I could say within the international community, which is really most of the people that would purchase the art, because it was difficult for most Ukrainians to purchase art. It was still kind of, how can I say? I guess it was still kind of booming compared to now. There's been another revolution since. There was a Orange Revolution in 2004, and then the Revolution of Dignity in 2013. And I think since it's become a little more difficult economically. Like initially when about 24 years ago, I think, was Ukraine's independence. And that's when it allowed for a lot of international people to move to Ukraine. And the American dollar was so strong compared to the Ukrainian money that, you know, people, Europeans and Americans and, you know, people coming from outside of Ukraine were able to spend money on, you know, on more things than now.
Mm.
So, but in terms of just culturally supporting the arts, I have found that Ukraine and Europe in general is culturally more supportive than America, I think. I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit biased, but it just seems to, and maybe that's changing. I just feel like it's more of it, from what I've observed, it's held on a higher level in Ukraine and Europe, like just the appreciation of art and culture compared to America. I don't know, maybe these things go in waves over generations, and you know, maybe America's been a little more focused on the material presence, and I wouldn't be surprised if that starts flipping. I feel like Americans now are starting to realize the value of it, and with new democracy and new capitalism in Ukraine, it's probably going to become more materialistic.
Right, right.
So maybe it goes in waves.
I think so. And I think it depends a lot on the context of the work as well. You know, obviously you're speaking really
True.
to the human element of a very personal story that probably a lot of Ukrainians can relate to. So I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a support for that. So were you living there during the annex of Crimea?
Yes.
Wow. How
Yeah.
was that experience?
Very sad. And I incorporate. We've done like we used to travel there as a family when the kids were little because it's such a beautiful, warm, tropical place, you know, to visit as a tourist and to indulge in that peace and quiet over there. Yeah, it's very sad and very seems, you know, as one of these unfair things that Russia was able to just kind of come in and it feels kind of like the big bully on the playground, you know, coming in and taking part of your country, and somehow internationally it doesn't seem correct that he was able to break this pact, and the world doesn't really do anything about it. It's a little depressing in that way.
Terrible. It's horrible. I mean, human rights violations left and right.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of comes with that part of the world, doesn't it? Unfortunately, so you saw a lot of military presence around Crimea, obviously, when that stuff was happening. Did you see that in the kind of communities where you were living yourself, or was it more focused on that area?
Sorry, could you restate that? I'm sorry. I think somebody's mowing the lawn outside. It got kind of loud.
No, I was curious to know if, you know, there was obviously a heavy military presence around that whole time and that area of Crimea to try and keep Ukrainians out of the area. Did you see that in the areas where you were perhaps living at the time, or was that?
Well, we've been living for the last 25 years in Kyiv, Ukraine, which is the capital, and it's in the center. So the time that was the scariest for Kyiv was right during the revolution in 2014 when over 100 Ukrainians got sniped and killed. And then that was going on for months with the tires burning. And in terms of the war in the East, I guess after the revolution, and then when Crimea got annexed and when he moved into Eastern Ukraine, when Russia moved into Eastern Ukraine, it was scary and surreal. But then life sort of kept continuing, which was the surreal part. I mean, the kids would wake up every morning and their first question was, did Putin come in? Did he advance? Are we leaving? Are we staying? You know? So it was a lot of anxiety. But then it was surreal because then they would go to school, my husband would go to work, and we were all pretending that things were normal. And so Ukrainians have had to kind of learn to live with this strangeness of the war going on in the East, and because it's still going on, and there's still soldiers dying.
Wow!
So it's a very surreal experience, and heavy, kind of a heavy.
I mean, I can't imagine. You talk about the generational trauma, but there's still actual trauma.
There's still actual trauma. That's true. Yeah. And a couple years ago, for my Behind the Lines exhibit at the Delaware Contemporary Museum, I created a video installation for the first time, which I interviewed 40 Ukrainians from all walks of life, and was asking them briefly to explain like how the war has been impacting their life. So that's on my website if anybody's interested in taking a look at that, because it's like 40 minutes. I reduced everybody to 1 minute. So it's a 40-minute video, and just interesting to hear people's comments about how it's affected their life and their views on it.
Is it olarondiak.com?
Yes.
Okay, I'm putting that right in the comments for anybody that wants to check that out.
Okay.
So how was that? Were there any surprises? Were there anything really particularly profound that came out of that experience?
No, I mean, it was still fresh. It was still, you know, I interviewed even veterans who lost limbs. I think the saddest part, I guess, for me, what I was hearing was that it's like when people die, soldiers, these are your brothers, your sons, you know, whoever's on the front line. It's like if you're able to at least keep moving forward, then people do feel like they did it for a purpose. But when, you know, when years are going by and the line's not moving and people are still dying, then it makes everybody start questioning, what are we in this war for if, you know, my son's life didn't change anything. So that then becomes very depressing, and people lose a little bit of the hope and spirit, I guess, you know, that should carry you through. But you know, and there's different viewpoints. You know, I've heard people say, well, maybe Ukraine should just accept itself as a smaller country and stop putting all this pressure and depression and loss of lives. But Ukrainians know that, you know, Russia's not going to stop there. So then it just becomes the new border, the new norm, and then Ukraine will continue to disappear. It's not like, oh, okay, let's shake hands with Putin and he'll say, okay, we're good, we're even. It's not, that's just not the reality. So you kind of have to keep fighting. And I think Ukrainians just know that from their history. There's just, you can never stop fighting. That's one thing Ukrainians know very well, which I think Americans, for the most part, are starting to learn that more, that freedom comes at a cost. It's not for free. I think there's been, you know, maybe a good deal of us that have been born in America that haven't fully grasped that, for the most part. Not everybody, of course, but.
So I'd be curious to know, was that what took you back to the Ukraine after being, you know, growing up here, and then returning first? Were you an adult when you returned, or were you still a child?
Yeah, I was an adult. I grew up here, you know, with my parents being so disappointed with the Soviet Union kind of suffocating Ukrainian language and religion and culture. Their generation of immigrants felt very strongly to continue to teach us the language and culture of Ukraine. So every Saturday I went to Ukrainian school in Ohio, and then every summer I was in Ukrainian camps. You know,
here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Like all summer, I'd go to a 3-week regular camp and then a 2-week sports camp, but it was all Ukrainians in Ukrainian language. And so I ended up, you know, kind of moving around a lot as a kid and having a lot of Ukrainian friends and connections all over the country. So when Ukraine gained its independence, it was right after my husband and I got married, and he's also first generation American. His parents emigrated from Ukraine, which was the point of our parents doing all these Ukrainian schools and camps, so that we would marry somebody Ukrainian and keep Ukrainian.
Well, how would it have been received if you came home with a non-Ukrainian?
Well, my sister married a non-Ukrainian, and my mother was upset about it for years. You know, we joke about it today, but my sister's like, man, that was tough, you know, because, and my mother's like the sweetest woman. You'd never think you'd see this come out of her, but she had a hard time, you know. During Christmas meals, she would just speak Ukrainian, and we'd be like, Mom, he's not understanding. And she'd say, well, let him learn. Yeah, they just felt so strongly about it, because they were so scared that Ukraine was going to disappear. So in this training or brainwashing, if you will, my husband and I, when Ukraine became independent, we were like, hey, he got a job opportunity there, was one of his best friends. So we said, let's go for a couple years before we have kids. But we ended up staying there already 25 years.
Wow.
So all the kids were raised in Kiev, Ukraine. They went to international schools, so now they have friends all over the world.
Oh, wow.
But they've all chosen to come back to the States now. They're all in school and working in the States. Wow. But my husband's still working full-time in Ukraine. So I'm basically I go mostly between New York and Kiev.
What brought you back?
Well, because all the kids are here.
Oh, so they came first.
All the kids are in America.
Wow.
Yeah, my son graduated first from high school, and he went to New York to start working. Then my middle daughter is in Atlanta, Georgia, and my youngest is at Ohio State University.
Wow.
So I have now a studio set up in New York and Kiev, and I go back and forth depending on where I'm needed more or where my shows are.
That's amazing. It's great that you're able to do that, to split your time between the two places.
I know. I'm very grateful for that. It's really wonderful.
There's such I know being an expat myself, and having lived, I feel almost like it's two different lives, right? You live in different countries, and just even the small cultural nuances, like they're impactful. Like, and I think that anybody who ever has the opportunity to live in a different country, even if it's for a short period of time, should absolutely do that.
For sure.
Especially as an artist, because there's a certain richness I think that you get from experiencing different cultures that you can't quantify or you can't really teach, right?
Absolutely. So how do you feel about the cultural differences? Do you see them?
100%, yes. I mean,
it's more valued in Europe.
Yeah, it's funny because listening to what you said about Europe valuing culture more so than perhaps the US. I don't know whether I maybe have a different experience of that. I felt that, and maybe this is just limited to the UK, because I grew up in the UK, but I almost feel like there is more support and championship of the creative kind of people here than there is in the UK. In the sense that you're allowed to kind of dream big here, whereas I think in Europe you have to sort of like conform into this narrow expectation of what an artist's life should look like, perhaps.
I totally agree with you in that sense. Yeah, I guess there's different levels or ways of interpreting the support, because I totally agree with you with that as well. Like, and things that are a little more outside of the box are difficult. For them to appreciate there as well. Yeah, that's true.
I feel like if for me to kind of conceive of conception arts in the UK, I don't think it maybe would have been able to get the fire underneath it that I was able to get here.
Yeah. I guess probably you're speaking on the bigger picture. Since you're the founder of an art organization, and I guess maybe I was speaking more on the smaller picture, just being an artist and like one-on-one conversations with people, or having an exhibit and everybody bringing flowers to the artist, where it doesn't happen in America. Kind of in that sense, of like wow,
a local kind of level.
Yeah, maybe just kind of the personal support, maybe, or.
But it sounds like
in Ukraine, I get more of like I'll feel stronger maybe about my self-esteem, or sort of the way it affects me as an artist, because people say, wow, they almost feel like I'm spiritually connected to the gods, or where here it's kind of more like, oh, you're just an artist, like, can you even make a living on that? It's kind of like,
right,
in that sense it's more like, oh god, I'm just an artist here. People
will say, well, what else do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's, I mean, yeah, I think as well, we have to look at where we are. Like we are in the place where there is more artists than anywhere else, really, probably in a condensed area, the New
True.
York metropolitan area. So we're not as unique, perhaps, as we would be somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But it's interesting that you said, that spiritual kind of connection. That we talk about the connection that you had to your ancestors. So this kind of lineage and line of amazing creative people. Do you ever feel that when you create that it isn't something that you perhaps are maybe as involved in, as maybe there's something coming through, kind of channeling through you?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm learning to believe in that more and more, like to trust it, because I used to get so much more anxiety or depression or like this pressure what I have to create, and now I'm more, maybe it's with age as well, but also through a little experience, that it's just I'm a little, well, I mean, I say this, but I still get the anxiety and everything else. But I'm trying to see it more as like this process, and I guess through the experiences, because once you have experiences and certain successes, you're able to believe in it more, right? So now I know, like, I actually almost want to do this freeing of the mind. Like I'm embracing this quarantine time now, more time with my family, with my kids, instead of being stressed out like, oh, I should be working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm truly embracing it. And I know that all of this carries with me into the studio, and it will only give me that much more energy and, and to try to just sort of leave when I go to create, try to leave my mind out of it a little bit and let it, like you say, pass through. So you sort of have to, I feel like I have to open up other channels to allow it to come through, and not to try to come to it all cognitively or control it.
And that can be hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's very hard because the daily life itself is extremely practical and planning and cognitive, and and it's like you have to switch gears.
I mean, we talked about this yesterday, actually, Suzanne and I, especially when there's so much art around you, which I think as artists, especially living in the New York area, you want to be absorbed in that culture. You want to be around this amazing, incredible, creative atmosphere that is Manhattan. But it can influence you, and it can be hard sometimes to not fall down the rabbit hole of another style of work, or bring influences of other people into your work because maybe they're having success, or you really moved by a particular piece of theirs. So one thing that is very clear with your work is that there's just a very common kind of visual language, very common thread. Like you would know instantly that it was a piece of your work. Did it take you a while to get to that point to find your voice? Did you experiment with different styles?
Yeah, I feel like there's a certain level of shedding, that has to happen before getting to it. And I think that's another thing that helps, over the years, understanding that process and not being automatically frustrated, and understanding that just being in the studio is that it's happening, even though it might take hours or days or weeks to get there, but you just have to put in the time, and it will come. Or just learn different ways to get it going. Like instead of sitting there and being frustrated, that's another reason I guess I'm into multimedia, is because I have several different things going on at the same time. And I almost like walk around and see what speaks to me, where I can do something. So I'm not just like thinking about what to do. I'll walk around and try to feel what to do. Like I've even been like, a crazy woman talking to myself sometimes. And I have several portraits going on, and I go up, or like if I have to clean up and I have paints left, and then I'm like, okay, who needs red? Who needs red? I'm talking to everybody.
That's amazing.
like I'm crazy.
It's not creative.
Yeah, it helps me to have lots of different things going on. And I think that it also helps me to go to different places. Like it helps me it's good for me. Like sometimes I complain about the jet lag, that takes a toll or whatever, but in the end, I think it's beneficial for me to move around, because the movement helps me get different perspectives and stuff. Probably because when I am creating, it'll be like I'll have a couple or a few weeks of not moving around. So then I call it my manic phase. Like I have to turn my mania on and like focus and get it done so that I don't do anything else. I don't see anybody. I don't go anywhere. The kids used to laugh at me that I just go between the kitchen, working out, and my studio in the house. They're like, when is the last time you left the house? You know? So that's not so good either. But that would happen like in the winter in Ukraine because it's hard for me in the cold. So I would be like, no reason for me to leave.
And there's some of the most thrilling times, I think, as an artist, right? To be just so absorbed, and I kind of call it in the zone, right? You're you're in that zone. You just everything feels like it's like you're doing exactly what you put here to do, right? This is
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like you try to keep that zone as long as possible. It's this precious little place. It's so easy to fall out, and so I would get very frustrated if somebody kicked me out because, especially as I was starting, it was like brand new feeling for me, and I didn't understand it all. So if I was just starting, and then the kids would interrupt me or something, I'd be like But now I'm trying to learn to be more calm about it and learning how to navigate between the two, how to hang on to do this practical thing, but sort of hang on to that and have better access to it, understand it a little more. It's all such a process, a learning process.
It is. It's if I could define it in any way, I'd say it's kind of a diva, the creativity zone. Because like even just
yesterday, that's funny.
Yesterday, I said to my wife Jen, I said, I have like an hour before I had to do anything, and I was like, I can't decide if I want to work on some art or start a work project, like a business work project.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, you have an hour, you could go work on some art, and I was like, I can't work when there's a time limit. Like if there's a clock saying you already have.
Absolutely. That's what I do too. So I always felt like I would try to have to get everything in order for like, I would plan the meals for the week. I would have everything planned out as much as I thought I could in order to free up that time in my brain to go there and fully get absorbed. So I would try to do that by getting everything practical in my mind as much as I could foresee. Like even if it was plane tickets 6 months in advance, let me get that done. Let me get this done.
That's dedication right there.
To try to free up that area, to allow yourself to go there, right?
That's really quite a spiritual description of how many of us do this, right? It's like you have.
Yeah, and I mean you're right in there. You're one of these super special people for doing this because you're doing both, like to each extreme. So you've clearly learned how to navigate between your sides of the brain, I guess, right? Because you have the business plus the artist.
Some days not.
Right.
I think that I'm just so passionate about this side of it and about. I learn so much from these kind of conversations, so it's
right.
It doesn't ever feel like a chore to be doing the business side of things to me.
That's right. Yeah.
Talk to me when we're doing the accounts, then that's a whole anything that involves the other side of my brain, maybe not. But that's why I have business partners. So,
Yeah. And it's a balance, I guess, right? It's always this balance that we're searching in life somehow.
Balance is hard. Balance is definitely hard.
Yeah. So artists are very good at that, huh? Typically.
But we do the best we can. So I'm intrigued. Part of your story, you were you are a psychotherapist.
Yes.
Tell me a little about that and how kind of what the parallels are perhaps between creativity and psychotherapy, and how those two parts of your life impact each other.
Well, I mean, like I said, I was first generation American. So my parents as immigrants, it was basically, are you going to be a doctor, lawyer, or teacher? It wasn't like, it wasn't the house.
It wasn't on that way.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going back on my words that Ukrainians value culture more because in my home growing up, it was very practical. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I have that actually developed that practical piece in my brain is highly developed, even though by nature I was meant to be an artist. But I guess growing up in that home, that developed my practical side. So it helps me in terms of, you know, with the exhibits and having shows and having deadlines. I can be efficient and practical also, you know, so that's helpful, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so I went into college not really knowing what I wanted to. I mean, college wasn't an option. It was an extension of our education, in terms of how my parents felt about it. And I just didn't know. I was basically undecided major for 3 years. They kind of were like, well, you're good with kids. Why don't you be a teacher? But there was something. But there was something about it that wasn't speaking to me. So I had a hard time choosing a major. I was at Ohio State University, which is huge, and I was also really stressed out about money because you know, I didn't grow up with much. So I was working a couple jobs at the same time, and then sort of a light bulb went off, and I guess thanks to my, you know, Ukrainian upbringing with the connections all over America, and my grandmother was living in New York, and I was like, wow, it'd be so cool to live in New York. So I figured out how to transfer to Hunter College and to live with my grandmother. And when I did so, then I guess it's sort of like when the light bulb went off that I had some control over my life, and I majored in psychology just because I was so interested in it. And then it sort of kicked in, like I got straight A's because it was like I was making my own decisions at that point. And then, but graduating with a psych degree, there isn't that much you can do really with a bachelor's degree, in terms of like you can't open your own practice yet. So I became a social worker in Brooklyn, and after 3 years of doing that, I got kind of burnt out. It was very hard. I was like the only little white girl from Ohio coming there thinking I could save the world, you know, big dream. And it was tough because for me, the bureaucracy really burnt me out more than I had a caseload of 50 kids. And I love them all, but I was always frustrated that I couldn't spend enough time with them because I was supposed to be their biggest advocate, and I couldn't, you know, there wasn't time in the schedule for it because you had to go to, you know, court meetings, and it's tough. So I think my hat's off to a lot of social workers out there because it's hard to not get burnt out. And I just felt like I wasn't making enough of a difference that I wanted to because I was doing so much paperwork. And I don't know, every time I felt like I found a solution, a home for a child, it's like, go to supervisor 1, then go to supervisor 2. This can't happen for this reason. I was like, what the heck? Isn't this the purpose to get this? Why is everybody making it so hard to get this child safe? And so I got really frustrated. So I thought, well, maybe I'll be better off helping people one-on-one, because the bureaucracy just maybe I just wasn't savvy enough or good at it. So I went for my master's degree in psychology to be a psychotherapist, and I've always enjoyed just listening and helping people in conversations, you know, but then actually the reality, my husband and I got married. I was working as a psychotherapist in Philadelphia. And the reality of that was that I still felt a little thin-skinned to be a very good therapist. I felt like I would take in everybody's problems like a sponge. And I would go home and cry all night. And I thought, well, I hope they feel better because I feel like shit. You know?
Wow.
And so then I thought, well, maybe I need to like raise my own kids, have a little more life experience to be a better therapist, because I felt like I was too thin-skinned and needed more life experience. Then my husband and I, we moved to Ukraine, and that's when I started experimenting with art. I think that Ukraine, well, actually, I started here as well. No, actually, that's a lie. I started more when we moved back to the States, when we started having kids. But I don't know, the whole back and forth to Ukraine, and I was working there as a therapist with the Peace Corps in Ukraine.
Wow.
Before we had kids, and I enjoyed doing that as well. I worked mostly with married couples who were there in the Peace Corps and the issues that they had to deal with. Because Ukraine was kind of thought of as a third world country back then, 25 years ago. It didn't really. There weren't any restaurants, so to speak of. There were no international supermarkets, no regular gas stations or McDonald's, or it was very like we were bringing things there. I was even bringing foil. I was bringing, when we moved back again with the 3 babies, I was bringing their diapers. I was bringing, baby food and formula and stuff. It didn't have these stores back then. So
how did that feel coming from, the other extreme of what the US is? And
I know. It was crazy. We would take exactly what we were allowed to bring. Like at that time, we were able to bring like 7 extra pieces. So we would bring huge boxes of stuff back. It was very emotionally torturing, and I didn't know that I was an artist. So I didn't really know how to channel all those emotions at that time. So it was very difficult for me because we had a lot of family in Ukraine and visiting them and their villages. I mean, some lived in the cities and were doing okay, but the family members that were in the villages and struggling so much. And it was very difficult balance because, we were in the American mind frame thinking, okay, we need to start saving for a children's college. And things like this, savings was important. But then when I looked how some of my family members were living in Ukraine, I thought, well, how do you balance this? Like, how do we figure out our own personal budget when we see this person can't, is going to die of cancer just because of the mere fact they can't go seek any help? Wow. How do we know how much, we can help? And we both had a lot of family there. So it's like, how do you balance it? How do we figure out how much we can help everybody, because you want to help everybody, but you can't. It's not possible. So yeah, it was a lot of balancing, and I didn't. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard for me emotionally, but I guess now I feel really fortunate to have this outlet in my art, because it's like all those stored up emotions. I can access them fairly easily.
That's amazing. So, I mean, how does it feel to kind of go full circle with this? So, we talked about your grandmother and that amazing story at the beginning, and, how there is this richness and this history with your ancestors obviously being oppressed, and there's still oppression in your culture today. How does it feel to kind of go full circle and stand in, these cultural institutions, embassies, and see your work celebrated like this? Like, how does that make you feel?
It's such an interesting question. I feel like crying when you ask it, because it's such an honor, and it's such a responsibility, and it's also very humbling, because it's just so, I feel so connected to my grandmother that I never met. And so it's like, and she's representing so many other people, in Ukraine, and women in general, really, so it feels like a big responsibility, and I feel like I'm just tapping into it. I feel like, these last 5 years, I'm just expressing I found this way to express, so I'm learning it. I'm learning how to do it, and in a skillful, professional manner. And so I feel like it's so much the beginning. I honestly, I know I'm middle-aged, but I feel like a little kid sometimes, because I feel like I'm finding a whole new way of expressing myself. And I feel like the sky's the limit. Like I'm in awe of somebody like you who started, your own arts, conception arts. Like I hope to do something like that as well, to expand out, like not just like, I feel like it's still necessary for me since I didn't go to art school. I feel like this time of focusing in the studio is very important and learning experience for me. It's still necessary for me as an artist. but I'm really looking forward to branching out and making it something even larger, you know, as you're doing. I think that's just so wonderful because, you know, I mean, I'm reaching a certain amount of people as an artist, but to go even to figure out what that is, you know, I still don't know what that is yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out what that is. It's been a very special experience to connect with people. That's how I learned, you know, that art is about something so much more than, you know, making something and selling it. It's, you know, because I used to be angrier about it. Like when I first started, it was like, well, it's so unfair, you know, why is the artist supposed to donate all the time? Why do I have to donate things for charities? Why do I have to donate for fundraisers? Why aren't they paying me to do that? And now now that I've learned how to tap into that source and how I know that it's endless fountain, now I see why it's like that. And then I'm going to start figuring out, you know, what will be the next chapter for me.
Plus, just on that note, for any artist that's out there thinking the same thing, like, why do I need to do this? And you don't. Everything's a choice, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I will say that opened a lot of doors for me.
Once you had that realization, yeah.
Donating, supporting.
Exactly.
You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know who's going to see your artwork. As long as you're smart and you make sure that you certainly optimize those opportunities and make sure that your information is included and it's known that you are the artist. And
that's right. Yeah, I still have a lot to learn with that.
Yeah. So what has there been one particular moment in your career that whether it was one of these institutions or whatever, where you've just kind of sat back and said to yourself, okay, this is it. This is exactly what the goal is, right? What the end goal is. Like this feels like it.
Yeah. I mean, there's been many of those moments, but as soon as you have that, you know, it's just that always wanting more, right? So I feel like I'll only allow myself to revel in that for a few minutes because I need to raise the bar, you know. So, but it's great. I mean, it's just such a wonderful feeling. It's like once in a while, you know, I'll just look and go, wow, I'm here. I'm in this National Museum. Like, this is too cool. Or like the Revolution of Dignity Museum in Ukraine has purchased several of my works. They have like a whole little collection now, maybe 9 pieces. I'm not sure. So it's like, wow, this is happening, you know. But I think I do it like I allow myself to revel in it. Only to give myself the self-esteem and I guess not motivation, but like what's the word, like what's that?
Like the inspiration to kind of continue forward? Or?
I guess the valuation or like validation.
There we go.
Validation. Yeah, that's the word. Allowed to feel that validation a little bit so that I have the confidence and self-esteem to go on to the next one.
That's amazing. So just give us a rundown of those institutions where that have kind of either purchased or you've had your work in, because it's a pretty impressive roster of.
Thank you. Well, the last 2 Decembers, I was fortunate to be part of the Context Art Miami in December. So that's one of those moments, you know, to walk around and go like, wow, I'm actually here already. Because I literally just went there for the first time probably 4 years ago. And then because a friend of mine said she was in it and she said, you have to come see what it's like because you're going to be soon. And I was like, all right, let me go see. And then it just started happening from there because then I set new goals because then I was like, and she said, take a look at what galleries are here. See, you know, start getting knowledgeable about this stuff. So it was very helpful for me because then I looked and I saw which galleries from Ukraine are participating. And so I went and met those gallery owners. And then in Ukraine, you know, I started going to the galleries and got to know the owner a little bit and gave them a proposal for a show. So then he allowed me to have a show in his gallery in Ukraine, in the capital. And it was very successful, sold several pieces, and he invited me to be with his gallery at Context the next year. So it's like, it's these little things we do. Like sometimes it's not, it wasn't even about my art when I went to support my friend. And because of that, because of her helpful tips and everything, it led me into another trajectory. Which I didn't even know that was going to happen. So that's been a really cool experience. And then I was with another gallery from Ukraine last year at Context Art Miami. And so that's been great. Being part of the Maidan Museum in Ukraine has been amazing. Because they've helped me in many ways. Just this last, a few months ago, at the end of the summer, we did, I had an exhibit called Metempsychosis, which is like the name means the transferring of one soul to another, which is kind of what I experienced with my grandmother and into my art. So that exhibit was awesome because I was invited. Well, my friend and I had an exhibit together in Ukraine. It's like always this, one thing to the next. We had a show in the gallery in Ukraine, and we invited a curator from New York who knew about our work from the curator at the Delaware Contemporary Museum, because she had met when I had a show there. And she had met him in New York, and he had worked with some Ukrainian artists. So she said, "Do you know Ola Rondiak?" So then he came to see my show there, and he loved it. So he then invited me to do a show in his gallery in New York. And then he had this great idea to do a transatlantic panel discussion, because I was simultaneously having a show in Kiev with the Maidan Museum and with the gallery in New York. Wow. So we did a transatlantic panel discussion that was hosted by the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America on 2nd Avenue in New York City. Wow. And it was a live feed, and it was really, really special with the Maidan Museum and White Box Harlem.
That's amazing.
And it was, the panel discussion was about the healing role of art in times of turbulence. So it was a very interesting conversation. And
anywhere online?
Yeah, it should still be online. Where I think I have the link in my website somewhere.
Great. So maybe
on the homepage.
Yeah, we can grab that, and I can put it in the comments afterwards for anyone who
wants. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. It was an interesting conversation.
How cool. So what I mean, one thing that kind of is so apparent there, and so apparent in conversations I have with people who have experienced this kind of measure of success, it's all about relationships, right?
It is.
That's the secret sauce.
Yeah. And moving forward, staying active, and the relationships. And that's why there's also a level of like with me saying yes to everything, because you have to let go of this perfection thing or whatever, thinking, well, that's not it. Like if somebody says you want this show next month, I'll say yes. And then I'm like, oh my God, how am I ever going to get it done?
Right.
I don't know the name. I don't have enough pieces. I don't know,
Yeah.
But somehow it gets done, and it's the beauty of it. And those deadlines are wonderful, because they force you, because like we said, otherwise it's easy to say, well, let me spend another day in practical land setting up for getting in the studio.
Exactly.
This way it's like, you just got to go and do it because it's next Friday. So, you have to come up with something.
I'm absolutely 100% on you with that. Say yes and figure out how to do it afterwards.
Yeah. And I mean, there's been many pieces in some of my shows where I'm like, wow, this isn't even finished, or, but it gets out there, and it's in the bigger picture of it all. Like now there's a couple sculptures I'm working on that have been in 2 shows, but I never felt like they were finished, because it was there for the conception of it, for the conceptual meaning, and it worked in terms of the whole show, but not as an individual piece to be, valued at a certain amount of money or whatever. It needed more, so.
That's amazing. So one last question. What is next for you? What is on your list of, the next 2 years? I know obviously we're going through a very interesting and strange time right now.
Yeah.
What's on your kind of to-do list? What are you
Well,
hoping?
there's been several great shows on the agenda for this year for me, which obviously have been postponed to an unknown date. I was invited to be part of a group show at the Hudson River Museum in New York. So I'm
Fabulous.
really excited about that. And part of the group show.
Actually, before we go any further, did you meet with Sarah Linda?
Yeah. Oh, because I met her at
Conception.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I'm so
well,
happy.
what happened was when I had my show at the Delaware Contemporary Museum, the director of the Hudson River Museum, Masha Turchinsky, she had seen my work and purchased a piece from me.
Wow.
So I've sort of been on her radar since then. And then when this group show, she thought of me for this group show coming up and invited me. So then she asked me to come to see the space and talk about it. So I went, and when I was looking at the space with her, then I met Sarah, and she's like, wait a minute, we met at Conception. I was like, that's right.
Well, she was on the panel that awarded the award that night.
Oh, she was?
Yep. She was wonderful. She's wonderful. She's one of our regular jurors for New York. So she comes out and.
Oh, that's so cool. See what a small world it becomes in a way.
It really is. It really is. You must keep us in the loop as to when you're going to be showing there, because
thank you. I will. Yeah, it was going to be like the first week of July, but we just texted the other day that she said she doesn't know for how long it will be postponed. We don't know what's happening.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so that's on the agenda, and a couple shows in Ukraine. I was invited to be part of a sculpture biennale in June in Kyiv for the first time, which I'm super excited about. So I've been working on how to make 3 giant Moltenka sculptures that can be outdoors for 3 months.
Wow.
So that was going to be a tough time crunch, but of course that Biennale now got postponed actually till 2022. So I have plenty of time to figure that out. But in some ways, I'm grateful for the slowdown, because in some ways I was feeling like it's so busy that, like, as I was saying, like on one hand, it's necessary, these deadlines, and to get in there and do. Mm-hmm. But, the introspective, peaceful times are just as important to creating, so that the new purpose evolves from a deeper place. So I'm a little bit grateful for this slowdown right now, and
it's
to listen a little bit.
Right. It's not often we're kind of forced into slowdown. So
yeah.
Much as it's a traumatic time, and there's so many people suffering, it's definitely given me the opportunity to hit that pause, and I'm screaming and kicking about it for a couple of weeks, but now that I'm kind of in it, it's a reflective time. It's a time to.
That's right.
To rethink some things, and to think about what's next. So
exactly.
I'm totally with you on that one.
Yeah.
All right. So tell everybody where they can learn more about you, and how they can get in touch and purchase a piece of your wonderful work.
Thank you. I have a website, www.olarondiak.com. So I guess we can put that in the comments, right? And I'm on Instagram, I'm at Ola Rondiak Art. And mostly through the website, you can get a good idea of my works, and through Instagram, and then my email is accessible, and my phone numbers. And right now I do have an exhibit showing at Metro Quadro Gallery in Wynwood Arts District in Miami. But it's obviously by appointment only right now. The doors are closed. So I'm not sure how long that show will be going. It was going to be through April, but since it's been closed, we haven't discussed exactly how long that will be running. And I have a couple pieces at Benjamin Arts Gallery on the Lower East Side in New York City, and in LA at the Ukrainian Cultural Center, at Zoria Fine Art Gallery in Greenwich, Connecticut, and in the gift shop at the Ukrainian Museum in New York City.
Wow.
You can find several pieces of my works and posters, and
it's amazing.
So, yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This was Ola Rondiak, amazing Ukrainian contemporary mixed media artist. We will be back tomorrow. Do check out the links in the comments if you want to learn more about Ola's work. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
See you.